It always starts the same way, doesn't it? The kind of connection that feels rare, natural conversation. A magnetic pull, you let your guard down not recklessly but intentionally. You open the door to your softness, your laughter, your truths. And he didn't just step through either, lingered, asked questions, listened, looked at you like you were the only one in the room. And just when it felt like something was finally taking shape, past silence. No explanation, no fight, no closure, just an echo where his presence used to be. You replay everything in your mind like a movie you never wanted to end. Was it something I said? Did I move too fast? Was I too open, too intense, too much? But deep down, another voice whispers this isn't about you. Because it never made sense, did it? He leaned in first, he texted back quickly, he remembered the little things, he made you believe this might finally be different. And then one day, without warning, the energy shifted. His words got shorter, his tone colder. The space between messages stretched like a rubber band until it snapped. And now you're left in confusion, holding on to a story that had no ending. But what if I told you this disappearance had less to do with you and everything to do with what you stirred in him? Because closeness, real closeness, doesn't just connect, it exposes, and not everyone is prepared to face what rises to the surface when true intimacy begins. So, before you bury yourself in guilt or shrink to fit someone else's comfort, pause, breathe. This isn't rejection, it's revelation. And in the next breath, we'll uncover the truth behind what really makes someone vanish the moment things start to feel real. Here's what no one tells you. When you're a woman who leads with honesty, who shows up as she is present, grounded, emotionally awake, you don't overwhelm people, you awaken them. And that awakening? That's what they're running from. It's not that you were too intense, it's not that you asked for too much. It's that you brought depth to a space that was never meant to stay shallow, and depth requires something many haven't yet cultivated: inner stillness, self-awareness, emotional maturity. Some men disappear not because they stopped feeling, but because they started to feel too much. And when a man hasn't yet met himself in those deeper waters, your presence becomes overwhelming, not because it's loud, but because it's clear. You didn't make him uncomfortable by being dramatic or needy. You made him uncomfortable by being real, by not playing games, by seeing through the masks, by offering connection without control, openness without expectation. That's rare, that's powerful. And it terrifies anyone still hiding from their own reflection. Carl Jung said that what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. When a man has resisted doing his inner work, when he's pushed away his fears, buried his shame, denied his wounds, your emotional presence acts like a mirror, not a distorted one, but a crystal clear reflection of what he hasn't yet faced. And that clarity? It doesn't push him away, he chooses to retreat from it. So don't mistake his absence as evidence of your failure. Understand it for what it truly is, a confrontation with depth he wasn't ready for. Not because you were too much, but because he hadn't yet become enough for the kind of love you offered. You weren't too deep. You were just deep enough to reveal his shallowness to himself. And instead of diving in, he ran. But here's the truth. A man who disappears at the first glimpse of depth was never ready to hold it, let alone honor it. And that says everything about him, not you. Carl Jung once said that everyone carries a shadow, and the less it's acknowledged, the blacker and denser it becomes. And when it comes to relationships, especially the ones that feel emotionally significant, the shadow always shows up. What is the shadow? It's the part of us we try to hide, the pain we never processed, the beliefs we never questioned. The parts of ourselves we were told were too much, too sensitive, too emotional, and so we locked them away to survive. But they don't disappear, they wait. And when a man starts to get close to a woman who really sees, those hidden parts begin to stir, not because she exposed them, but because her presence invited honesty. Her calm became a contrast to his chaos. Her emotional fluency made his repression obvious, and his shadow, no longer ignored, started to rise. You didn't provoke it, you simply activated it. That activation is terrifying, because for someone who's spent years or a lifetime avoiding their own emotional truth, being near someone emotionally whole isn't comforting, it's confronting. When you touched something in him that felt unfamiliar yet magnetic, It wasn't because you were doing anything wrong, it was because you were mirroring a level of integration he hadn't reached. And his nervous system didn't interpret it as opportunity, it interpreted it as danger. So he disappeared. Not because he didn't care, but because his unacknowledged shadow screamed run. And this is the hardest part to accept. He didn't walk away from you. He walked away from the version of himself he would have had to meet to truly stay. A version he wasn't ready to face. Not yet. Most people think intimacy is about closeness. Soft words, tender gestures, affection. But real intimacy, the kind that transforms you, goes far deeper than that. Because true closeness doesn't just touch the heart, it awakens the unconscious. And for many men, that awakening feels like a threat. Why? Because it doesn't just stir up love, it stirs up memory. Emotional blueprints formed in childhood, fears of inadequacy, abandonment, control. The echoes of being told that vulnerability is weakness, that emotions must be buried, that being seen equals being exposed. And then you walk in, not loud, not forceful, just real, present, awake, and suddenly, what's been repressed for years has nowhere to hide. You didn't cause the chaos, you simply entered the room and lit a candle, and in that light, the ghosts emerged. Most men don't have the tools to name that, so they label it something else: pressure, intensity. Not the right time, but what they're really saying is, my unconscious is wide awake, and I don't know how to handle it. Carl Jung wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So many men disappear not because they've chosen to hurt you, but because they don't yet understand the script they're following. The story wasn't written by you, it was written by years of emotional avoidance. But here's the radical truth. Your presence didn't create the discomfort, it revealed it. And for those not ready to grow, revelation feels like danger, not opportunity. So if he vanished after things got real, it wasn't the realness that pushed him, it was the awakening of a self he hasn't yet dared to meet. And no woman, no matter how loving, can make someone stay if they're still afraid of their own depths. Let him go. His exit was the answer to a question you didn't even need to ask. Let's get something clear, he wasn't pretending. The warmth you felt, the ease between you, the way he leaned in, asked questions, held space that was real. The connection wasn't manufactured. You didn't imagine it. And the energy wasn't one-sided. He meant it, in the moments he could. But here's the thing most people don't talk about. Genuine connection doesn't always mean sustainable connection. Because desire isn't the same as readiness. And just because someone feels something doesn't mean they know what to do with it. So yes, he felt safe with you. He admired your depth, maybe even saw in you something he didn't know he was seeking. But then, without warning, something inside him recoiled. Not because he stopped feeling, but because the foundation beneath those feelings began to crack. This isn't about you being too good, or him being not good enough. It's about structure. And if the internal scaffolding of a person's emotional world hasn't been built with truth, accountability, and self-awareness, real intimacy becomes impossible to hold. Think of it like a beautiful house built on sand. The walls can be flawless, the view breathtaking. But the moment a storm comes, something deeper, more confronting, it all starts to collapse. That storm was closeness. He didn't walk away from something fake. He walked away from something real that asked him to meet it with realness, and he couldn't. Because emotional resonance without emotional capacity creates one outcome: retreat. You might still feel confused. That's normal, because when someone disappears after showing up so fully, it feels like betrayal. But this wasn't betrayal, it was revelation. He revealed his limits the moment love stopped being light and started being real. So don't let his exit make you doubt the magic. Let it remind you that realness, on its own, is not enough. It also needs readiness, and readiness can't be faked. There's something sacred about a woman who shows up with her heart unguarded, not reckless, not desperate, but clear. A woman who isn't afraid of her emotions, who knows what she wants, who speaks her truth without flinching. That kind of emotional presence, it's not just attractive, it's illuminating. And that illumination turns into a mirror. When you walk into someone's life with clarity, with depth, with the courage to be fully seen, you unconsciously hold up a mirror to them. And if what they see isn't what they want to confront, that reflection becomes unbearable. Because what if they've built their entire identity on surface-level validation? What if their idea of connection was always based on performance-presence? What if they were never taught that vulnerability doesn't make you weak, it makes you real? Suddenly, in your presence, they have no script, no mask, no shield. And that can feel like standing naked in front of a truth they weren't ready to admit. It's not that you exposed them, it's that your emotional availability revealed everything they were working so hard to avoid. The fear of not being enough, the shame of not being seen, the grief they never processed. You didn't do anything wrong, you just were. You stood there in your softness, your insight, your quiet certainty. And in doing so, you became a mirror for everything they hadn't yet faced within themselves. That's the paradox. You weren't too much. You were just too honest for someone still addicted to pretending. And here's the truth. Most don't want to hear some people would rather walk away from the mirror than face the work. They'd rather ghost you than grow with you, not because you were wrong for them, but because they're still wrong for themselves. So the next time someone retreats from your presence, don't chase them down the hallway of their own fear. Stay still, stay grounded, let the mirror speak for itself. Because if he couldn't handle his own reflection, he was never going to be able to honor yours. There's a subtle, dangerous thing that happens in early connection known most people don't even notice. It's not love, not yet. It's projection, and many men confuse the two. See, projection is when we take our unmet needs, old wounds, fantasies, and hopes and place them onto someone else. We don't fall in love with them, we fall in love with the idea of who they could be. We fall in love with the reflection of our longing. And in the beginning, it's easy to mistake that rush for truth. He saw something in you, something warm, safe, grounded, a spark of light that made him feel alive again. But instead of staying present with that real version of you, he layered you with all the qualities he desperately wanted to believe existed: unwavering acceptance, unconditional warmth, perfect understanding, a muse, a healer, a cure. You didn't offer that fantasy, you just offered you. But that wasn't what he was in love with. And when reality started to surface, when your boundaries appeared, when your voice spoke honestly, when your humanity showed through, that projection began to crack, and with it, the illusion collapsed. It's not your fault he ran. He wasn't running from you. He was running from the dissonance between who you actually were and who he imagined you to be. The fantasy faded, and he wasn't ready to love someone real. Because someone real means accountability, imperfection, depth. And projection asks for none of that. Love invites presence. Projection avoids it. So if he disappeared after the honeymoon glow wore off, understand this: it was never sustainable to begin with. Not because you weren't enough, but because he wasn't willing to let go of the fantasy long enough to truly see you. Not every man who disappears is making a conscious decision. In fact, most of them aren't. Because when he walks away after closeness, after laughter, after emotional warmth, he's not doing it as a grown man. He's doing it as a wounded child in a grown man's body. That child carries memories, silent scripts that whisper things like, "You're not lovable, you'll be left," or, "If they really see you, they'll leave." These aren't thoughts, they're emotional imprints, formed years before you ever met him, and you, unknowingly, touched them. Maybe it was in the way you looked at him too softly, the way you listened without judgment, the way you cared too consistently. That kind of emotional safety isn't familiar to someone who grew up feeling unseen, unheard, or conditionally loved. And instead of leaning into it, he panicked. Because here's the brutal irony. When someone finally offers what the inner child always needed, it doesn't always bring peace. It brings fear. Fear that it will be taken away. Fear that it's too good to be true. Fear that the pain of losing it will be worse than never having it at all. And so he runs, not because he wants to hurt you, but because he hasn't yet healed himself. You weren't asking too much. You were offering something he wasn't yet able to receive, the love he craved, but wasn't safe enough inside to hold. Carl Jung believed that, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. And this is exactly Thetan unconscious script playing out again. He pulls away not as a decision but as a reaction. So don't blame yourself for the distance. Don't internalize his retreat as a reflection of your worth. Recognize it for what it is: a man caught in a pattern written long before you arrived. And know this, It's not your job to reparent him, to fix him, to prove that you're safe. It's your job to honor yourself enough to not shrink just because someone else still hasn't found their way home. Carl Jung believed that every man carries within him an inner feminine, what he called the anima. She lives in the unconscious, shaping his relationship to emotion, creativity, intuition, and connection. And most men have never met her. Why? Because our culture teaches men to fear softness, to bury tenderness, to avoid vulnerability at all costs. So the anima, instead of being integrated, stays hidden, distorted, unacknowledged, and this creates conflict within themselves and with the women they meet. Because then you arrive, and you're not just beautiful, you're emotionally present, spiritually grounded, intuitively alive. You don't flirt to get attention, you speak to connect. You don't perform, you embody. Without knowing it, your presence activates his anima. It's not about seduction, it's about recognition. Something in him stirs, a longing, a memory, a part of himself he has ignored. But here's the problem: he may not have the tools to understand what's happening inside him, and what the soul recognizes, the ego often resists. Instead of being drawn toward wholeness, he becomes afraid. Because facing the anima means facing everything he was told to suppress: his sensitivity, his intuition, his emotional depth. It means integrating the feminine he's been taught to reject. And for a man still entangled in rigid masculinity, that feels like losing control. So he distances himself not from you, but from the parts of himself you unknowingly reflected back to him. Your maturity didn't repel him, it awakened him. And some men don't run from women, they run from their own inner feminine, screaming for recognition. But let him go, because integration can't be forced. The man who's done the inner work won't be shaken by your depth. He'll be drawn to it not as a threat, but as a home. Just because a man chases you doesn't mean he's prepared to keep you. There's a vast difference between wanting a connection and being ready for one, and that difference doesn't always show up on the first date or in the flurry of early affection. It shows up the moment things get real, when closeness reveals the cracks. It's easy to pursue someone when everything is light and new, when it's all charm and curiosity, when your stories are still unfolding and no expectations have been placed. But the moment consistency is needed, the moment your emotional presence asks to be met with his, that's when the illusion starts to unravel. Because desire can be loud, but readiness is quiet. It lives in how he listens, how he takes responsibility, how he holds space when it's uncomfortable. And that level of presence, not everyone has it, especially the ones who lead with pursuit, but haven't yet cultivated stability. Many men confuse attraction with availability. They think their want means they're capable. But true intimacy requires more than interest. It requires infrastructure. It requires self-awareness, accountability, emotional tools, and most of all, the willingness to face the parts of themselves that relationships always, inevitably, reveal. If he ran after you, made grand gestures, promised the moon and then slowly pulled away when things turned real, it's not because you changed, it's because he never had the roots to grow into what he started. And that's not your failure to fix. That's his bridge to build. So stop doubting your energy. Stop questioning your emotional openness. The ones who confuse intensity with readiness will always fall short, not because of you, but because they mistook chemistry for capacity. The man who is truly ready won't just pursue you. He'll show up again and again because he's done the work to meet you where you are. And he'll stay not because it's easy, but because he's no longer running from himself. It's easy to take it personally when someone pulls away without warning. When one day they're leaning in, texting good morning, asking how you slept, listening with interest, and the next, they vanish. No explanation, just silence. But what if I told you? It wasn't malice. It wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. See, most men haven't been taught how to sit in emotional intensity. They've been taught how to perform in it, avoid it, escape it, but not how to hold it. So when a woman arrives with genuine clarity, emotional maturity, and steady presence, something inside him short-circuits. He doesn't know what to do with someone who doesn't need fixing, who doesn't beg to be seen, who simply is. That kind of woman doesn't ask for chaos, asks for truth. And that request, though often unspoken, is too much for someone still hiding from their own. So he disappears, not as punishment, not because he stopped caring, but because he felt exposed. Because when he was with you, he couldn't hide behind charm. He couldn't dodge intimacy with distraction. He couldn't pretend to be someone he's not. You made him feel something, and he didn't know how to hold it. Carl Jung believed that when we avoid confrontation with the self, we act unconsciously. And that's what this is, a reflex, a flight response. Not because you were dangerous, but because being seen was. So don't romanticize it, but don't hate him either. He left because staying would have meant confronting a version of himself he wasn't yet ready to meet. And that kind of confrontation, that's terrifying when you've spent a lifetime avoiding it. Some men don't walk away because you were confusing. They walk away because you were clear, because you didn't beg, because you didn't chase, because you didn't turn yourself inside out to prove your worth. You just stood there calm, grounded, emotionally available, and that clarity, it disrupted every ounce of chaos he still depended on to feel in control. He didn't know how to exist in your energy because it asked for something deeper, something real. It held up a mirror and said, "Here I am. Who are you beneath the noise?" And if he was still living in that noise, still addicted to emotional games, highs and lows, push and pull, your peace felt foreign, even threatening. You didn't create the tension, you revealed it. Because when you are anchored in your self-worth, you stop playing roles, you stop needing validation, you stop entertaining confusion. And for someone who thrives in uncertainty, your presence becomes intolerable, no because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're no longer someone they can unbalance. Clarity is magnetic, but it's also disruptive. It shakes loose everything that isn't built on truth. And some men aren't ready for that kind of honesty, not because they're bad people, but because they've never seen love without distortion. They were raised in chaos. They loved through crisis. They were validated through inconsistency. And you were none of that. You were soft and firm, open and discerning, warm but not naive. And when someone isn't ready for that kind of emotional ecosystem where love doesn't mean sacrifice and connection doesn't require self-abandonment, they panic. So they leave. Not because they couldn't see your value, but because they'd never seen anything so stable before, and stability requires self-responsibility. And if he's not there yet, he'll mistake your peace for pressure, your presence for threat. Let him go. Clarity deserves to be met with clarity, not confusion, not chaos, not disappearance. It's hard not to internalize it. One day, he's present, curious, open, saying all the right things, and then without warning he's gone. The absence speaks louder than any goodbye ever could, and you're left trying to decode the silence. Your mind does what minds do, it turns inward, picking you apart in microscopic detail. Was I too open? Did I share too much? Was I not enough of something, or too much of everything? But here's what you need to know. This wasn't about your inadequacy, this was about your intensity. Not loud intensity, energetic intensity, truth, presence, the kind of feminine power that doesn't need to shout to be heard, the kind that holds space without needing to fill it, the kind that reflects without performing. And that kind of energy doesn't repel healthy men, it reveals the unready ones. He didn't disappear because you lacked something, he disappeared because he lacked the internal structure to withstand your clarity. Your energy stretched him further than he was willing to go, and, instead of leaning in, he collapsed. It wasn't personal, it was predictable. Carl Jung taught us that people project their unconscious material onto others until they're willing to face it themselves. You were never the cause, you were the mirror. And when a man hasn't yet learned to sit with his own reflection, he runs. So stop seeing his retreat as a judgment of your worth. See it as confirmation of your strength. Because when your light makes someone uncomfortable, it doesn't mean dim. It means you were shining in the presence of someone still hiding in shadow. Let's make something clear once and for all. Men who have done the work, who have sat in the fire of their own becoming, do not run. They don't flinch when closeness arrives. They don't pull away when they're seen. They don't disappear when connection deepens. Because they've already faced the chaos within. They've met their shadow. They've felt the ache of their inner child. They've stopped blaming others for the wounds they refuse to name. And because of that, they're no longer afraid of intimacy, they welcome it. Wholeness doesn't fear wholeness, it recognizes it. So if someone left after getting close, it's because he hadn't yet reached that place within himself. He was still fragmented, still reactive, still building armor, instead of dismantling it. And in your presence whole, grounded, emotionally aware, he saw the gap between where he was and where he'd have to go to meet you. And instead of growing, he ghosted. Disappearance is not a character flaw. It's a spiritual checkpoint. It signals where someone still has work to do. It shows you who's still operating from fear, from projection, from avoidance. And it reminds you of what you already are, whole, conscious, present. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The ones who disappear when things get real haven't yet made that descent. They're still afraid of the dark. But the man who Hashi stays, not because it's perfect, not because it's easy, but because he knows that love begins where fantasy ends and realness begins. And that's the only kind of love you ever need to hold space for. Let this be your permission to stop chasing the ending. You don't need to go back, rewrite the story, or beg for an explanation. You don't need to reread every message or analyze every look. You don't need closure from someone who never had the courage to stay. Sometimes the vanishing is the closure. And as painful as it may feel, it's also the gift. Because now you see what's real. Now you understand the weight of your presence and the kind of man it requires to hold it. You are not here to shrink so someone else can feel tall. You are not here to carry someone through a battle they refuse to fight within themselves. You are not a stepping stone for someone's emotional evolution. You are not a spark to ignite someone else's healing. You are not a mirror to reflect what they are unwilling to see. You are a woman who has done the work, who has looked at her pain, named her patterns, opened her heart anyway. You are whole, not perfect, but integrated. And the kind of man who disappears after intimacy begins? He was never meant to stay in the presence of that kind of truth. Let him go. Not with resentment, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because when you release someone who couldn't meet you, you make space for someone who can, someone who won't vanish when things get real, someone who won't flinch at your strength or retreat from your softness. Someone who stays not because he needs you, but because he's already found himself. Carl Jung taught us that when we align with our true self, the external world shifts, not because it changes, but because we're finally seeing clearly. And now, you're seeing clearly. You weren't too much. You weren't too intense. You weren't too anything. You were the mirror. You were the light. And some people simply aren't ready to see in full brightness. But the ones who are, they stay. Because light doesn't scare them, it calls them home. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.